Alfred Adler, the founder of individual psychology and one of the towering figures of early 20th century psychiatry, believed that the fundamental engine of human behavior was the drive to overcome feelings of inferiority, to compensate for perceived weakness through achievement, control, and the assertion of superiority. The will to power, in Adler's framework, was not pathology. It was the basic fact of human motivation, and psychological health was largely a matter of channeling it constructively. Viktor Frankl, who was influenced by Adler and whose own work he acknowledged, ultimately parted company with this view. Not because power was unimportant, but because he had seen, in the most extreme conditions, what happened when people had access to power without meaning, and what happened when they had meaning without power. The results were not what Adler's framework predicted. Frankl's critique of Adler is, in some ways, subtler than his critique of Freud. Freud reduced human motivation to biology, the drives. Adler elevated it one level, to the social, the drive for status and mastery in relation to others. Both frameworks, Frankl argued, missed the specifically human dimension, the dimension of spirit, of logos, of the capacity to orient oneself towards something that transcends both biological impulse and social competition. A person who climbs to the top of a hierarchy has achieved the Adlerian goal, and may still feel completely empty. A person who has lost every social standing but has found something to live and die for has achieved something Adler's framework cannot name. Frankl encountered this paradox in the camps with terrible clarity. Among the prisoners, those who had once held great social power, prominent businessmen, decorated officers, respected professionals, were often among the most psychologically devastated. Their entire sense of self had been organized around the Adlerian structure: achievement, recognition, superiority. When all of that was stripped away, there was nothing underneath. But other prisoners, sometimes people of modest background and limited social power, held together with astonishing resilience because they had, before or during their captivity, found a meaning that did not depend on social position. A young rabbi who continued to conduct informal prayers even in the camp was exercising a form of strength that had nothing to do with power over others. He was exercising the will to meaning. The distinction has sharp clinical relevance. Adlerian therapy focuses significantly on the inferiority complex, the sense of inadequacy that drives compensatory striving, and works to transform neurotic compensation into healthy social contribution. This is genuinely useful. But Frankl observed a class of patients who had successfully resolved their inferiority complexes, who were confident, socially capable, and professionally successful, and who were nonetheless profoundly unhappy. What they lacked was not confidence but purpose, not mastery but meaning. They had everything Adler's framework promised and still felt that something essential was missing. Frankl called this class of suffering neogenic neurosis arising not from psychological conflict within the psyche but from existential frustration at the spiritual dimension of human existence. The treatment for neogenic neurosis was not deeper insight into childhood dynamics or better social strategies. It was a confrontation with the existential question: for what am I living? What, specifically, do I believe my presence in the world makes possible that would otherwise not exist? The modern landscape gives this debate a particular urgency. We live in a culture that has, broadly speaking, adopted an Adlerian operating system. The metrics by which most people measure their lives, income, status, followers, professional rank, competitive achievement, are power metrics. The relentless comparison enabled by social media is an Adlerian machine, continuously feeding the inferiority complex and the compensatory drive for superiority. And yet, by every measure of psychological well-being, the pursuit of status and social comparison is one of the strongest predictors of misery. The Adlerian game, played at full intensity, tends to produce exactly the symptoms it was supposed to cure. Frankl's alternative is not the rejection of ambition but its reorientation. Achievement pursued in the service of a genuine meaning, a contribution only you can make, a vision you are uniquely positioned to realize, produces something Adlerian achievement alone cannot: the sense that your efforts matter not because they have made you superior but because they have made something in the world better. The will to meaning and the will to power can coexist and reinforce each other. But when they diverge, when power is the goal and meaning is nowhere in the picture, Frankl's clinical experience and his own life testify to where that road leads. The rivalry between Frankl and Adler is, in the end, a rivalry between two visions of what human beings fundamentally are. Adler saw social animals competing for status within a hierarchy. Frankl saw spiritual beings capable of transcending every hierarchy in the pursuit of something genuinely worth their one and only life. Both saw real things. But only one of them had tested his vision at the absolute limit of human experience, and found it standing. The practical consequence of Frankl's disagreement with Adler is accessible in daily life. The next time you feel the pull of comparison, the urge to assess your standing relative to someone else, to measure your success against theirs, to feel either the relief of superiority or the sting of inferiority, ask a different question. Am I doing this because it serves something genuinely meaningful to me, or because I am measuring myself against someone else's yardstick? The Adlerian game is never really won, because the hierarchy is infinite and the comparison never ends. The Franklian game has a different winning condition, not being better than others, but being genuinely yourself in the service of something that genuinely matters. That standard is both more demanding and, in the experience of those who have found it, infinitely more satisfying. Subscribe to The Psychology of Viktor Frankl to explore more of his timeless ideas.